Hello. Here we go. I'm going to be reviewing this new Fantastic Four First Steps movie. This is the third Marvel film of the year, the second of the summer, and is released at a time of great uncertainty for this franchise as there is not a lot of financial success going on. The first two movies this year, Brave New World and Thunderbolt, to varying degrees, bombed financially. Even if the Thunderbolts, I think, is a pretty good movie. Meanwhile, Brave New World is just an absolute disaster. But with Fantastic Four, this feels like a very significant release for this franchise, as it is an introduction to a very beloved cast of characters that have never really been done well in film format. And as we are gearing up for next year when we get the next big team up movie, Avengers Doomsday, the Fantastic Four are going to play a huge part in that film, and any excitement that can be gotten from the success of this film is necessary for that movie to do as well as Marvel wants it to do. But also it feels as though this studio is very interested in getting this film right. They very much took their time with this film, whereas with a lot of other movies, they rushed it, they didn't have a script, they were rewriting as they were going along. And Fantastic Four feels like the first time they've really locked in and just tried to make a good movie. Thunderbolts was kind of like this as well, but Fantastic Four is really like this, which seems like a no-brainer, like just make a good movie. But for the past 2 to 3 years, they just haven't really been doing that. They feel like they've been on autopilot. And so it's great to get a film like this that feels like a focused vision, and for the most part works quite well. I would say that First Steps isn't a perfect film, but is one of the better blockbusters of the summer so far. The first thing that stood out to me was the visual style. It's a very retro futuristic look within the costume design, the production design, the lighting, the cinematography, and all of it just looks really, really great. Very comic booky. A bit of a brighter, zanier look to this film. No special effects are really that bad. There's a couple of baby CGI moments that are a little bit weak, but in comparison to a lot of CGI from blockbusters from the past couple of years, this is really, really great. The score also helps this film a lot, not only with dictating the pace and the momentum, but also just building a vibe, building a mood and an atmosphere. It kind of meshes with that retro futuristic visual look, as well as Michael Giacchino, the composer here, who by the way also worked on the Incredibles score, and there is a lot of Incredibles comparisons to the Fantastic Four, especially in the score. But anyway, Michael Giacchino is very much meshing these classical orchestral arrangements with some more futuristic, modern sounding synth bass going on within this score, and I think it just meshes together really well. Very exciting and propulsive score, but sometimes doing a bit too much. There's a couple moments where very bombastic music is being played, and some silence, or at least some restraint on the composition front, could have maybe made the moments land a little bit better. But for the most part, the over-the-topness, that bombasticness of the score really does make this film work, and again, very much dictates the mood. This is a little bit of an in-your-face, very optimistic, but also kind of bombastic movie. It's got a lot of visual flair, it's got a lot of style, and it moves very, very quickly. That's actually one of my major complaints about this film, specifically in the first act. It's moving really, really fast to the point where it's a little bit difficult to keep up with and a little bit difficult to kind of get into the swing of things. The screenwriters made the decision to just skip the origin story, and this film starts 4 years into the Fantastic Four being a team and having superpowers, which I think was a good idea, just because watching another origin story would have been pretty uninteresting. But just like another July superhero movie, Superman, Fantastic Four just kind of goes right into things. We're kind of just thrown into the action immediately. As a result, there's some front-loaded exposition that can get a little bit tiring, a little bit exhausting within the first act, setting up a lot of characters, setting up a lot of dynamics, and for the most part, they do a good job of easing the viewer in. But there's about a 10-minute section in this film that I just found to be a little bit overstuffed. Luckily, once you hit that first act break and Silver Surfer sort of shows up and introduces the idea of Galactus as the antagonist, the movie starts to zero in on what it wants to be about, which is obviously about family, specifically about motherhood, also just being a parent and being a protector. And in the Fantastic Four's case, it's not only protecting each other, but also protecting the entire world. There's a lot of bright-eyed optimism in here that I think contrasts really well with a lot of the cynical superhero movies that we've been getting lately. Another similarity that this film has to Superman, in that People just kind of love the Fantastic Four, unconditionally. And even if there are some moments where they do have some qualms with the way the Fantastic Four are going about doing things, for the most part, this team is just seen as this great symbol of hope. In terms of performances, I think for the most part, they are pretty good. Pedro Pascal is maybe a little bit miscast as Mr. Fantastic, and it just for some reason comes off as a little bit flat, a little bit monotone to me in some of these exposition scenes. I find it so strange that Pedro, in interviews and in the press and like on the internet, and the reason really he has gained such a huge following is because he's very like gleeful and fun and like spirited. But for some reason, with this film, with The Materialists, with The Last of Us, with basically everything he's done in his entire career, with the exception of like Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, he has decided to play very restrained and reserved characters, which in my opinion kind of goes against the sort of thing he should be doing. But for the most part, he does nail this, especially when you start to get into the more emotionally intense scenes. Vanessa Kirby is probably the standout here as the emotional core of this film. Like I said, it is about motherhood, and it's specifically about, her being a mother, her desire to keep everybody around her safe. So I think dramatically speaking, she's probably the best performance. But comedically and just entertainment-wise, I really like what Joseph Quinn and Ebon Moss-Bachrach are doing. Their chemistry in particular, when they're just like hanging out or doing whatever, is really great. Really any of like the moments of the Fantastic Four just talking to each other or going through life, I find to be really great. The banter works really well. Each kind of combination of cast members have great chemistry together, and the film does a great job of making sure that it's an ensemble. It's not like Pedro Pascal is the lead. Everybody gets their time to shine. Everybody gets their moments, and they intentionally try to pair up these characters in specific scenes so you can kind of get a feel of the dynamic between each character, which I thought was a really clever way of going about easing us into these characters without necessarily having this bland exposition origin story thing. There's not a lot of laugh out loud moments here, but this movie isn't necessarily trying to be funny. It's more so trying to be fun, and it really succeeds at being fun. It has a lot of great spectacle to it. Again, the visuals are really, really great. I love the way they handled Galactus. I thought he just looked very intimidating. The scale was just incredible. And again, that's something that could look kind of stupid with the wrong visual effects with some poor CGI, but he genuinely like looks intimidating and menacing. Also, Ralph Ineson's voice acting is really great and just adds on to that intimidation factor. My minor complaint I mentioned before is that it does move a little bit too quick, and there's some moments in the second act where I feel like it kind of stagnates, but I do also like that a little bit because it gives us time to just hang out with these characters. My other complaint is not really about this film in general, and as a result, it's not going to affect my score, but it is kind of about the general MCU stuff going on right now. And that is that this doesn't really lead very well directly into Avengers Doomsday, which is coming out next year and is like the big team up movie. These feel like characters that we just need more time with. This feels like a movie that could stand alone on its own and not lead directly into something. And as great as these characters are, as great as this world is, I feel like it's just gonna kind of get diluted down into generic MCU stuff whenever they get thrown into a big team up movie, specifically with like the visual style and the score here. No other world, no other movie, no other franchise within the MCU has this very retro futuristic visual style, and because they're kind of going into that world, it means that that style is probably just going to go away, which is frustrating because it is probably the best aspect of this film. And I guess I'm excited to see these characters, team up with Spider-Man or Thor or whatever. I guess I am, but at the same time, I feel like these characters need a little bit more time to be fleshed out on their own, and they're not going to be getting enough screen time within these big team-up movies to really be getting all that fleshed out. But like I said before, this is a criticism about the MCU as a whole and not about this movie, which I think is generally quite good. A couple flaws, a couple pacing issues, a couple of performances that maybe could have used a little bit more sauce to them, I guess. But generally, I really liked it. I'm glad that they kept it under 2 hours. It was tight, it was quick, it was fun, it was pretty solid blockbuster filmmaking. And yeah, I'm going to be giving this a 3.5 out of 5. Superhero movies I was pretty down on at the beginning of this year, especially after Brave New World. But this summer, Thunderbolts was pretty good. Superman was pretty good as well. And this one is probably the best of the bunch, I would say. So yeah, maybe go watch it if you want, if you care about superhero movies. That's all I have for this video. Next week, I believe I'm doing a Together review. And at some point, I'll be doing a Weapons review, which is probably like the last big movie of the summer. So yeah, that's all I got to say. Bye-bye.